A respected black doctor, Dr. Evelyn Reed, chief at Houston's vital Taub Hospital, is cornered by cops in a luxury store after a grueling shift. Accused of theft merely for wearing scrubs, she faces aggressive threats of arrest, her dignity shredded. Feel the sickening tension rise as her rights are dismissed. Then she reveals her official hospital ID badge. Witness the officers freeze, their smug authority instantly replaced by stunned panic. Discover the raw, powerful story of everyday bias laid bare and the fight for respect beneath the badge. View what happens when the tables turn so dramatically. The Houston humidity clung thick and heavy even as the late October sun began its slow descent, painting the downtown skyline in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple. Dr. Evelyn Reed, 46 and weary down to her bones, navigated the sluggish river of traffic on I-45 North. Her silver Lexus, usually a cocoon of climate-controlled calm, felt inadequate against the city's sprawling energy and her own mounting fatigue. Today had been a crucible. As chief of infectious diseases at Taub Hospital, one of the nation's busiest public trauma centers, Evelyn oversaw a department perpetually strained, perpetually underfunded, perpetually fighting battles on multiple fronts: microbial, systemic, societal. The latest budget hearing had been brutal, a stark reminder of the chasm between the vital needs of Houston's most vulnerable populations and the resources allocated to serve them. She'd spent hours arguing for increased funding for community outreach programs aimed at tackling disproportionately high rates of TB and HIV in marginalized neighborhoods, her voice growing hoarse. Her meticulously compiled data met with polite nods and fiscal caveats. Now, all she craved was the quiet sanctuary of her bungalow in the Heights, a glass of chilled white wine, and maybe an hour of losing herself in a complex surgical journal, anything but the lingering frustration of the day. But there was one necessary detour. Her godson, Mateo, was having his 8th birthday party tomorrow. Mateo, the bright spark of her best friend Maria's life, was obsessed with space exploration, a passion Evelyn wholeheartedly encouraged. She'd promised him a specific, high-powered telescope model she'd seen advertised at Celestial Wonders, a specialty store over in the affluent River Oaks district. Ordering online felt too impersonal for this gift. Evelyn was acutely aware of the shift required when moving between the gritty reality of Taub, serving primarily poor and minority patients, and the polished enclave of River Oaks. It was more than just a geographical transition, it was a code switch, a subtle recalibration of posture, speech, and awareness. Evelyn, a black woman who had navigated predominantly white academic and professional spaces her entire life, was fluent in this unspoken language. Daughter of a Tuskegee airman and a university librarian, granddaughter of sharecroppers, she carried her history not as a burden but as a bedrock. Yet, the need to constantly anticipate and navigate potential prejudice was an exhausting undercurrent to her accomplished life. She wore her hospital attire, navy blue scrubs embroidered with her name and title, comfortable walking shoes, her ID badge still clipped to the v-neck. Her hair was pulled back in a practical, neat bun. She hadn't had time to change after leaving the hospital, grabbing only her worn leather satchel containing her wallet, phone, keys, a protein bar, and a couple of medical journals. It wasn't how she'd choose to present herself in River Oaks, but Mateo's telescope wouldn't wait. Finding parking near Celestial Wonders took 15 minutes, circling blocks lined with imposing mansions and luxury vehicles. The store itself was tucked into a small, exclusive shopping center. Its windows displayed gleaming telescopes, intricate models of planets, and framed photographs of distant nebulae. Inside, the lighting was hushed, the carpet plush. Classical music played softly. It smelled faintly of expensive wood polish and stillness. A middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a meticulously knotted tie, Mr. Abernathy, the owner, according to a small plaque on the counter, gave her a brief, assessing glance as she entered. His smile was thin, professional, but cool. A younger white woman, maybe early 20s, with bright, artificially blonde hair and a name tag reading Tiffany, was rearranging a display of astronomy books. She offered Evelyn a quick, nervous smile before looking away. Evelyn felt the familiar prickle of hyper-awareness. The subtle shift in atmosphere. The way Mr. Abernathy's eyes lingered a fraction too long on her scrubs, her satchel. She ignored it, focusing on her mission. "Good evening," Evelyn said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm looking for the Starseeker Pro telescope." "Ah, yes," Mr. Abernathy said, gesturing towards a large display near the back. "An excellent choice. Very popular." His tone suggested faint surprise that she would be seeking such an item. Evelyn walked towards the display, admiring the powerful instrument. It was exactly what Mateo wanted. She examined the accompanying tripod, the eyepieces. She spent perhaps 10 minutes looking it over, comparing it mentally to the online specs she'd reviewed. Tiffany hovered nearby, ostensibly dusting already spotless shelves, occasionally glancing her way. Satisfied, Evelyn turned back towards the counter. As she approached, she noticed a smaller, high-end pair of astronomical binoculars displayed under glass near the register. Curious, she paused, leaning slightly to read the description. They were impressive, military-grade almost, and exorbitantly expensive. She lingered for perhaps 30 seconds, mentally calculating the magnification, before shaking her head slightly, definitely overkill for an 8-year-old, and proceeding to the counter. "I'll take the Starseeker Pro," she informed Mr. Abernathy. "Certainly," he said, moving to retrieve a boxed model from the storeroom. Tiffany remained near the front, now fiddling with the credit card machine, her movements jerky. Mr. Abernathy returned, placing the large, heavy box on the counter. "Will that be all for you today?" "Yes, thank you," Evelyn said, reaching into her satchel for her wallet. The satchel was deep, and she rummaged for a moment, pushing aside a journal and her keys. "Ma'am," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice suddenly losing its veneer of politeness, hardening into something sharp and suspicious. "Before you pay, I need to ask what you have in your bag." Evelyn froze, her hand still inside the satchel. The classical music seemed to fade, replaced by the frantic pounding in her ears. It was happening. Again. Decades after integrating schools, years after ascending to a leadership position at a major hospital, here she was. "I beg your pardon?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "Your bag," he repeated, his eyes flicking towards Tiffany, who looked pale and avoided Evelyn's gaze. "Tiffany thought she saw you slip those high-powered binoculars into your satchel while you were looking at them." Tiffany swallowed hard. I thought, the way you were standing," she stammered, unable to articulate a coherent observation. A wave of heat washed over Evelyn, humiliation mixed with a searing, righteous anger she rarely allowed herself to feel, let alone express. She was Dr. Evelyn Reed. She saved lives. She managed a multimillion-dollar hospital budget. And here, in this hushed temple of expensive hobbies, she was being accused of petty theft like a common criminal. "Let me be perfectly clear," Evelyn said, withdrawing her hand from the satchel, empty. She enunciated each word with chilling precision. "I did not put anything in my bag besides my own personal belongings. I came here solely to purchase this telescope for my godson." "Well, we just need to be sure," Mr. Abernathy insisted, puffing out his chest slightly. He crossed his arms, planting himself firmly behind the counter, the very picture of proprietary vigilance. "Store policy. We have to check. Store policy does not entitle you to baselessly accuse customers of theft and demand to search their private property." Evelyn shot back, the physician's measured tone giving way to the sharp edge of someone accustomed to command. "Are you formally accusing me of shoplifting?" "Look, if you just cooperate, we can clear this up," Abernathy said dismissively. "If you've got nothing to hide." The implication hung poisonously in the air-conditioned quiet. A well-dressed white couple browsing constellation charts near the window pretended to be deeply absorbed, pointedly looking away. Their deliberate lack of engagement felt like a form of complicity. "I have nothing to hide," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "But I will not submit to a search based on your employee's vague thought and your obvious prejudice. Either ring up the telescope I intend to purchase or I am leaving." Abernathy's face hardened, his complexion reddening. "If you won't cooperate, I have no choice but to call the police." Evelyn stared at him, a cold dread mixing with the fury. The police, in River Oaks, responding to a call about a black woman in scrubs accused of stealing high-end binoculars. She knew how this scenario could play out. She saw the downstream consequences of such encounters every day in the emergency room at Ben Taub. Misunderstandings escalating, implicit bias shaping interactions. Lives irrevocably altered. She thought of Mateo waiting for his telescope. She thought of her parents, who had endured far worse indignities with quiet strength. She thought of her patients, relying on her clear head and steady hand. "Then call them," she said, her voice barely a whisper yet resolute. She would not run. She would not be intimidated into forfeiting her dignity. She stood her ground, the heavy weight of the ordinary day suddenly crushing, the air thick with the impending storm. The silence in celestial wonders stretched, thin and brittle, punctuated only by the frantic thumping of Evelyn's own heart and the distant, incongruous strains of Mozart. Mr. Abernathy stood by the phone, dialing with an air of righteous conviction. Tiffany wrung her hands behind the counter, looking miserable. Evelyn remained rooted to the spot, focusing on maintaining a calm, steady posture, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside. Her mind, trained for rapid assessment and critical decision-making, raced through potential scenarios, legal precedents, and the bitter history that led to moments like this. She was Dr. Evelyn Reed, Chief of Infectious Diseases. She lectured residents on diagnostic precision, on looking beyond surface symptoms to find the underlying cause. The irony was corrosive. Here, her own surface, black skin, practical scrubs, presence in an unexpected place was diagnosis enough for suspicion. The flashing lights, red and blue slicing through the twilight, reflected in the polished window panes, signaled their arrival. 2 Houston Police Department officers pushed through the glass door, their presence instantly magnifying the tension in the small shop. The first officer, Ramirez, looked young, Hispanic, lean and alert, his hand resting casually near his service weapon. His eyes scanned the scene, Abernathy pointing, Tiffany shrinking, Evelyn standing composed but isolated. The second officer, Brody, was older, white, heavy-set, with a florid face and eyes that seemed weary and cynical. He surveyed the shop with an air of bored duty. "What's the problem here?" Ramirez asked, his voice sharp and authoritative, addressing Abernathy. "Officer, thank God," Abernathy exclaimed, stepping forward eagerly. "This woman," he gestured pointedly at Evelyn, "was attempting to steal a pair of expensive binoculars. My employee saw her conceal them in her bag. She refused to let me check it." Ramirez turned his gaze on Evelyn. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it was laden with immediate assumption. "Ma'am, we have a report of theft." "What's going on?" Officer Evelyn began, keeping her voice level and steady, meeting his gaze directly. "That is a false accusation. I came here to purchase the telescope on the counter." She gestured towards the large box. "I briefly looked at some binoculars near the register, but I did not touch them, let alone conceal them. This gentleman demanded to search my personal satchel without any probable cause, based only on his employee's unfounded suspicion. I refused an unlawful search." Ramirez exchanged a quick glance with Brody. Brody shifted his weight, his expression unchanging. "Ma'am," Ramirez said, taking a step closer, adopting a tone that brooked no argument. "We need to ascertain the facts. If you just let us take a look in the bag, we can resolve this quickly." "Officer Ramirez," Evelyn stated, emphasizing his name, "I understand you are responding to a call, but there is zero evidence of a crime here. There is no probable cause to search my belongings. This accusation is baseless and appears to be motivated by racial bias." The phrase racial bias sharpened the atmosphere. Ramirez's jaw tightened. Brody sighed audibly, as if inconvenienced by the predictable complication. "Look," Ramirez said, his patience wearing thin. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just show us the bag." "No," Evelyn repeated firmly. The word felt like anchoring herself against a strong current. "I am aware of my Fourth Amendment rights. You do not have legal grounds for a search. So you know your rights?" Ramirez scoffed, a smirk touching his lips. He seemed to relish the confrontation. Everyone's a constitutional scholar these days. The condescension was infuriating. It was the casual dismissal, the assumption of ignorance, that stung almost as much as the accusation itself. "Actually," Evelyn replied, her voice taking on the precise, slightly detached tone she used when explaining complex diagnoses, "my work requires a fairly thorough understanding of regulations and rights." "All right, I've heard enough," Ramirez snapped, gesturing towards her satchel. "You are being detained for investigation of theft by appropriation. Give me the bag, or you will be placed under arrest for resisting." Brody took a half step forward, seemingly preparing to assist. The threat was explicit now. Arrest. Handcuffs. The back of a squad car. A record. The potential ramifications for her medical license, her reputation, flashed through Evelyn's mind. Fear, cold and visceral, gripped her. This could escalate dangerously, irrevocably. She thought of Sandra Bland, pulled over for a minor traffic violation just miles from Houston, her life ending tragically in custody. But acquiescing felt like a betrayal of her own integrity, of the principles she stood for, of every patient who relied on her strength. She had to de-escalate, but not capitulate. "Officers," she said, forcing calm into her voice, though her hands trembled slightly. "Before this proceeds any further, perhaps you should verify who I am." We'll verify who you are down at the station if you don't cooperate, Ramirez retorted impatiently. Driver's license and registration. Now, Evelyn shook her head slowly. I believe this might be more pertinent. She reached not for her satchel but for the ID badge clipped to the neck of her scrubs. The one Abernathy had clearly seen but dismissed as irrelevant, perhaps assuming she was a low-level aide or transport worker. The one the officers hadn't yet focused on. With deliberate movements, she unclipped it. It was a standard hospital ID issued by Harris Health System, the public entity overseeing Ben Taub. It featured her photograph, professional, serious. Her name, Evelyn Reed, MD. And her title clearly printed beneath, Chief, Infectious Disease Service, Ben Taub Hospital. She held it out, presenting it clearly to Officer Ramirez. Ramirez instinctively took a step back, his eyes widening as he read the badge. The aggressive posture sagged. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned confusion, then dawning realization. He looked from the badge to Evelyn's face, clad in the same scrubs as the woman in the photo, and back to the badge. The title, Chief, resonated with authority even within the different hierarchy of the hospital system. Ben Taub, while a public hospital, was a major city institution, intricately linked with law enforcement through its trauma care. Its chiefs of service were significant figures. Ramirez stammered, blinking rapidly. Brody, sensing the sudden, dramatic shift in his partner's demeanor, stepped forward and peered at the ID. His weary expression flickered with surprise, then something akin to alarm. He looked at Evelyn with newfound, grudging respect mingled with apprehension. He recognized the name, or at least the significance of the title and institution. They dealt with Ben Taub's staff constantly. This wasn't just some random woman off the street. A heavy silence fell, thicker than before. Abernathy looked completely baffled, sensing the tectonic shift in power but not understanding its source. Tiffany just stared, her mouth slightly open. The officers froze. Their momentum, their assumptions, their casual exercise of authority all halted mid-step. They were processing the information, recalculating the interaction. Accusing a recognized chief of service at the city's main public hospital of shoplifting wasn't just problematic, it was potentially career-damaging, especially given the clear lack of evidence and the immediate assertion of bias. Ramirez slowly, carefully, handed the ID badge back to Evelyn, his hand unsteady. Dr. Reed, we apologize, ma'am. There seems to have been a significant misunderstanding. His tone was now deferential, laced with panic. Brody nodded quickly in agreement. Our apologies, doctor. Just responding to the call, you understand. Terrible mistake. The swiftness of the reversal was dizzying, nauseating. The respect wasn't for her inherent dignity as a human being, or even as a customer. It was for the title, the status, the implied institutional power and connections her ID represented. It was respect born of fear of repercussions, of complaints filed through official channels, of awkward questions from superiors who liaised with hospital leadership. Evelyn clipped her ID badge back onto her scrubs, the plastic clicking softly in the charged silence. The simple action felt imbued with immense weight. A misunderstanding, she repeated, her voice flat, devoid of the relief or forgiveness they desperately hoped to see. Fueled by prejudice and resulting in false accusation and attempted intimidation. Yes, I suppose you could call it that. She looked past the suddenly subservient officers at Abernathy, whose face had gone from red indignation to pale confusion and now dawning horror as he began to connect the dots. The power dynamic had irrevocably inverted, but the victory, if it could be called that, tasted like ashes. The air in Celestial Wonders remained thick with unspoken apologies and frantic damage control. Officers Ramirez and Brody hovered awkwardly, their previous aggression replaced by an almost comical deference. Mr. Abernathy looked as if he might be physically ill, his face pale and sweating. Dr. Reed, Brody said, his voice smooth, attempting to regain control of the narrative, perhaps we can just take down some information for an incident report? Document the store's error. He carefully framed it as Abernathy's mistake alone. Evelyn held his gaze. Officer Brody, your incident report should accurately reflect that you and Officer Ramirez detained me without probable cause, threatened me with arrest, and attempted an illegal search based on a flimsy, biased accusation. Ceasing only when presented with identification you deemed respectable. Is that the report you intend to file? Ramirez winced. Brody cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. We were following procedure based on the citizen complaint, ma'am. Your procedure appears to lack critical checks for bias and requires immediate review, Evelyn stated curtly. She had no more energy for this charade. She turned to Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Your accusation was insulting and potentially dangerous. Your employee, Tiffany, she glanced at the young woman who flinched, clearly requires training on observation versus assumption. And you, her gaze locked back onto Abernathy, need to seriously examine the biases that led you to escalate this situation so readily. Abernathy opened his mouth, then closed it, speechless. Evelyn pointed to the large box on the counter. I no longer wish to purchase this telescope or anything else from your establishment. Doctor, please? Abernathy stammered, finally finding his voice, desperate now. Allow me to offer you the telescope. Complimentary. As a sincere apology for this dreadful error. The offer felt cheap, insulting. A bribe for her silence, for the humiliation she'd endured. No, thank you, Mr. Abernathy, Evelyn said, her voice dripping ice. My godson will receive a gift purchased elsewhere. I suggest you invest the cost of that telescope into comprehensive anti-bias training for yourself and your staff. She picked up her leather satchel from the floor where she'd dropped it earlier, slinging it over her shoulder. She walked towards the door, the officers parting instinctively to let her pass. Dr. Reed, Ramirez called out, sounding genuinely distressed now. Do you intend to file a formal complaint? Against the store owner? Or regarding our actions? The question hung in the air, heavy with potential consequences for both officers and for Abernathy. Evelyn paused at the door, her back to them. She could make their lives very difficult. A formal complaint from a chief of service at Taub would trigger a serious internal affairs investigation. It could impact their careers, their futures. She held that power now, a power derived not just from her title, but from their blatant misconduct. I will be evaluating all my options, she said quietly, leaving them in a state of anxious uncertainty. She pushed through the door, stepping out into the humid Houston evening. The ordinary sounds of the city, traffic, distant sirens, faint music from a nearby restaurant, rushed in, a welcome contrast to the suffocating tension of the store. She walked quickly towards her car, her legs feeling unsteady, the adrenaline dump leaving her shaky and nauseous. Reaching her Lexus, she leaned against the cool metal, closing her eyes, taking deep, deliberate breaths. The image of Ramirez's and Brody's faces shifting from condescending authority to panicked deference was seared into her memory. It wasn't relief she felt, but a profound weariness, a deep sorrow. Her ID, her title, had acted as a shield, deflecting the worst of the encounter. But what about the countless others? The Evelyn Reeds who worked different jobs, who didn't have MD or chief next to their names. What happened to them when confronted with the same bias, the same presumptive guilt? Were they arrested? Did they lose their jobs? Did worse happen? Her cell phone rang, startling her. It was Maria Rodriguez, her best friend, Mateo's mother. Maria was a fierce immigration lawyer, fighting different battles but fueled by the same passion for justice. Evie, hey, just checking if you managed to snag the Starseeker 5000 or whatever it's called. Maria's voice was warm, teasing, full of life. Maria, Evelyn began, her own voice cracking unexpectedly. Something just happened. What? What's wrong? You sound awful. Maria's tone shifted instantly, the lawyer's sharp perception cutting through the exhaustion in Evelyn's voice. Evelyn recounted the entire incident, from entering the store to the accusation, the arrival of the police, the threats, and the sudden reversal when she showed her hospital ID. Her voice was low, tight with the effort of keeping the emotion in check. Maria listened without interruption, her silence punctuated by sharp intakes of breath. When Evelyn finished, there was a pause filled with palpable fury. Those Hiosta. Evie, I am so sorry, Maria breathed, her voice vibrating with anger. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Not physically, Evelyn admitted. But humiliated? Enraged? Terrified for a minute there? Yes. All of the above. Mostly, I'm just so tired, Maria. So incredibly tired of having to be twice as composed, twice as credentialed, just to be treated as baseline human. I know, amiga, Maria said softly, the anger softening into deep empathy. But you know this isn't just about you, right? They saw a black woman in scrubs in River Oaks and assumed the worst. Your chief ID didn't erase the profiling. It just stopped them mid-assault when they realized who they were messing with. I know. That's what makes it worse somehow. So, what are you going to do? Maria asked, her lawyer instincts kicking in. You have to report them. Ramirez, Brody, that racist store owner Abernathy. Make them accountable. Use your position, Evie. Make them understand this isn't acceptable. I'm thinking about it, Evelyn confessed, the weight of the decision pressing down. But using my title like that feels complicated. Is it justice, or is it leveraging privilege? If I complain as chief of service, does it overshadow the fact that this happens constantly to people without titles? Leveraging privilege? Maria scoffed. They leveraged their privilege, white privilege, male privilege, the privilege of the badge, the privilege of owning a store in River Oaks. You using the tools available to you to demand accountability isn't abusing privilege. It's fighting back. Think of your patients at Ben Taub, Evie. How many of them face this garbage every day without recourse? You have a voice they don't always have. Use it. My focus has always been systemic, Evelyn argued, echoing internal debates she'd had for years. Changing policies, improving health outcomes for the community. A personal complaint feels small. Almost petty. It's not petty when it's your dignity, your safety on the line. And sometimes the personal is the systemic, Evie. Your story, amplified by your position, could force a conversation the department doesn't want to have but needs to. I need time to think, Evelyn insisted. I need to separate the physician from the person who was just profiled. Can you? Maria asked gently, echoing a question Evelyn often asked herself. In the city? In the skin? Does the world ever let us? The question lingered long after the call ended. Evelyn started her car, the engine humming softly. She pulled out into the Houston traffic, heading towards the relative safety of the Heights. In the rearview mirror, she saw her own face, tired, strained, the professional composure fraying at the edges. The ID badge resting against her chest felt heavier than usual, a symbol not just of her achievements, but of the unequal world that made its revelation so potent, so necessary, and ultimately so profoundly unjust. The weight of that ordinary piece of plastic felt immense. The days following the River Oaks incident settled into a tense rhythm for Evelyn. She immersed herself in the demanding routines of Ben Taub, rounds, consultations, administrative battles, the constant, low-grade hum of crisis management. Yet, the memory of celestial wonders intruded, sharp and unwelcome during quiet moments, the condescending smirk on Officer Ramirez's face, Mr. Abernathy's accusatory glare, the sickening lurch in her stomach when they threatened arrest. She documented everything meticulously in a password-protected file, time, location, names, dialogue recalled verbatim, the sequence of events. It was the scientist in her, seeking order amidst chaos, but also the pragmatist, preparing for potential action. She hadn't filed a formal complaint. Maria's impassioned plea resonated, but Evelyn remained conflicted. She spoke confidentially with David Chin, the chief medical officer for Harris Health System and a trusted colleague. David, a measured, thoughtful man, listened intently, his expression growing grim. Evelyn, this is outrageous, he said finally. Completely unacceptable. If you want to file a complaint with HPD, you have my full support and the support of Harris Health. We can liaise directly with the Chief of Police's office. Your position gives us leverage, and frankly, we have a vested interest. Our staff needs to be safe and respected in the city, whether they're on shift or off. I appreciate that, David, Evelyn said. But my concern is, will it be seen as Dr. Reed, Chief of Service, pulling rank? Or will it highlight the everyday reality for Black Houstonians, regardless of their title? Why can't it be both? David countered gently. Your specific experience, because of your position, starkly illustrates the absurdity and the danger of profiling. It throws the bias into sharp relief precisely because it happened to you. Sometimes the most powerful way to expose a systemic issue is through a case that defies easy dismissal. His words gave her pause. Perhaps leveraging her position wasn't about personal retribution, but about making the incident undeniable, harder to sweep under the rug. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, ripples were already spreading. Officer Brody, older and more politically attuned than Ramirez, had likely briefed his precinct captain, emphasizing the potential issue involving a Ben Taub chief. Word traveled informally through department channels. Police officers frequently interacted with Ben Taub staff in the ER. Reputations mattered. Meanwhile, Mr. Abernathy, terrified of a lawsuit or public relations disaster, took his own preemptive action. He fired Tiffany, the young blonde employee, citing poor judgment and failure to follow protocol, making her the convenient scapegoat. He then sent a large, elaborate floral arrangement to Evelyn's office at Ben Taub with a card expressing deepest apologies for the misunderstanding. Evelyn directed her assistant to donate the flowers to the hospital chapel and discard the card. The incident might have remained contained within those circles, but Maria Rodriguez wasn't one to let injustice slide quietly. While respecting Evelyn's initial request not to name her publicly, Maria shared a carefully anonymized version of the story with contacts at a local community advocacy group, Houstonians for Police Accountability (HPA). HPA posted a brief account on their social media platforms. Disturbing report: respected black professional woman wearing hospital scrubs after a long shift serving our city. Falsely accused of theft and threatened by HPD in upscale River Oaks store. Accusations dropped only after ID revealed significant professional standing. When will HPD and Houston businesses address pervasive racial bias? Hashtag shopping while black, hashtag Houston profiling, hashtag HPD accountability. The post gained traction quickly. Comments poured in, stories from other black and brown Houstonians detailing similar experiences in River Oaks and other affluent areas, expressions of outrage, defenses of HPD, arguments about protocol. A local news blogger picked up the thread, amplifying the story. Celestial Wonders online reviews were suddenly bombarded with negative comments referencing racial profiling. The public pressure reached HPD leadership. Chief of Police Frank Donovan, a politician in uniform navigating the complex dynamics of Houston policing, found himself facing questions. He contacted David Chin at Harris Health, seeking to understand the situation better and ensure lines of communication remained open. David called Evelyn. Chief Donovan's office reached out, he informed her. They're clearly feeling the heat from that HPA post. Donovan wants to assure us they take these matters seriously and expressed a desire to speak with you directly if you're willing to offer a personal apology and discuss the officer's conduct. Evelyn considered it. A direct conversation with the chief. An opportunity not just to receive an apology, but to push for something more substantive. David's earlier words echoed. Why can't it be both? Her personal experience could become a lever for broader change. Okay, David, she said, making a decision. Set up the meeting. But make it clear I'm not interested in just an apology. I want to discuss training, protocols, and accountability regarding bias-based policing, particularly in response to these kinds of citizen calls. She then called Maria. The chief of police wants to meet, she said. Good. Maria replied, satisfaction evident in her voice. The pressure worked. Now make him listen, Evie. Tell your story. Speak for all the people who don't get that meeting. I intend to, Evelyn said. And Maria? Thanks. For amplifying. Always, amiga, Maria said warmly. Some of us work the system from the inside, some of us kick it from the outside. We need both. A few days later, Evelyn received an unexpected email. It was from Tiffany, the fired employee from Celestial Wonders. She'd found Evelyn's hospital email address online. The message was short, awkwardly worded, and clearly heartfelt. Dear Dr. Reed, I am so incredibly sorry for what happened at the store. I feel terrible. Mr. Abernathy had been telling me for weeks to watch certain people more closely, especially if they didn't look like they belonged. I got nervous when you looked at the binoculars because they were so expensive and I just reacted badly. It wasn't right. I didn't actually see you take anything. I never should have said anything. He fired me right after you left. I probably deserved it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I hope you're okay. I'm going to try to be better. Sincerely, Tiffany Miller. Evelyn read the email twice. It didn't excuse Tiffany's actions, but it painted a clearer picture of Abernathy's influence and the insidious nature of coded instructions about certain people. It also revealed a young woman caught in a situation fueled by fear and ingrained bias, now facing the consequences while Abernathy likely continued insulated. It added another layer of complexity to the incident, reinforcing the need for systemic solutions that addressed bias at all levels. The meeting with Chief Donovan was set for the following week. Evelyn prepared meticulously, gathering data on HPD's profiling complaints, reviewing their existing training materials, and formulating specific, actionable recommendations. The echoes of that humiliating encounter were transforming, focusing her resolve. She would use her voice, her position, and the weight of her experience not just to recount a personal grievance, but to demand institutional reckoning. The meeting with Chief Frank Donovan took place at HPD headquarters downtown, a building that felt both imposing and strangely familiar from Evelyn's interactions via Ben Taub. She arrived not in scrubs, but in a sharply tailored navy suit, her professional armor. David Chin accompanied her, a silent signal of institutional backing. Chief Donovan, flanked by his assistant chief and the commander responsible for the River Oaks precinct, greeted them with practiced solemnity. He offered Evelyn a formal, direct apology for the unacceptable experience she endured and for the conduct of officers Ramirez and Brody. He assured her that both officers faced disciplinary action, mandatory retraining, a formal reprimand in their files, and temporary reassignment from patrol duties. Evelyn acknowledged the apology with a brief nod. "Thank you, Chief Donovan. However, apologies and disciplinary action for individual officers, while necessary, do not address the root cause. This incident was not simply about two officers having a bad day. It was a manifestation of systemic bias and inadequate protocols." She didn't recount her story in detail. Donovan clearly knew it. Instead, she launched into her analysis, presenting data on racial disparities in HPD stops and searches, particularly in response to vague, suspicious person calls from affluent neighborhoods. She cited studies on implicit bias and its impact on decision-making under pressure. "Your officers defaulted to accusation and intimidation based on appearance and location," Evelyn stated, her voice calm but unwavering. "They ignored clear procedural steps for verifying a complaint before escalating. The fact that my hospital ID, a symbol of professional status, was required to de-escalate the situation is damning evidence of the bias at play. Respect and constitutional rights should not be contingent on perceived social standing." She then laid out her proposals. Mandatory enhanced implicit bias training, not just online modules, but interactive. Scenario-based training developed with input from community groups like HPA and incorporating specific scenarios involving cross-racial/cross-class encounters in retail and public spaces. Revised dispatch and response protocols. Clearer guidelines for dispatchers handling potentially biased citizen calls, and stricter requirements for officers to seek corroborating evidence before initiating detentions or demanding searches in low-level property crime accusations. Emphasize de-escalation as the primary tactic. Strengthened accountability, implement an early intervention system to identify officers with patterns of bias-related complaints, ensuring meaningful consequences beyond simple reprimands. Data transparency. Publicly release anonymized data on stops, searches, and complaints, broken down by race, location, and disposition, to allow for independent analysis and build community trust. Donovan listened, his expression serious. He pushed back gently on some points, citing union contracts, budget constraints, the complexities of implementation. But he didn't dismiss her concerns outright. The combination of her standing, the public pressure generated by HPA, and the clear failure highlighted by her specific case created an opening. "Dr. Reed," Donovan said finally, "you've given us a lot to consider. Some of these recommendations align with reforms we are already exploring, though perhaps with less urgency than you rightly demand. I can commit to a thorough review of our training curriculum and response protocols for these specific types of calls, incorporating insights from your experience and recommendations. I am also willing to meet with HPA and other stakeholders to discuss these issues further." It wasn't a revolution, but it was movement. A commitment to review, to dialogue, to potentially incorporate specific changes. Evelyn knew, as did David, that follow-through would require sustained pressure, both from within institutions like Harris Health and from community groups like HPA. Leaving the meeting, Evelyn felt a sense of guarded optimism, mingled with the familiar weariness. She had used her platform, turning a moment of personal violation into a catalyst for potential systemic improvement. In the following months, the changes were incremental, not dramatic. HPD did revise aspects of its training, incorporating more specific scenarios on bias in retail settings. They held tentative meetings with HPA, though deep distrust remained on both sides. Celestial Wonders, under pressure from negative publicity and perhaps fearing further action, implemented mandatory diversity training and quietly settled a small claim with Tiffany Miller for wrongful termination after Maria Rodriguez made some discreet inquiries on her behalf. Mr. Abernathy remained the owner, perhaps slightly chastened, perhaps not. Evelyn never returned to River Oaks for shopping. She found Mateo an excellent telescope online, presenting it to him with a story not about celestial wonders but about the real wonders of the universe and the importance of looking closely, questioning assumptions, and standing up for what's right. The incident didn't define Evelyn, but it undeniably became part of her narrative, a stark reminder woven into the fabric of her demanding life. It reinforced her commitment to her work at Taub, serving the communities most often subjected to the biases she had briefly yet powerfully encountered. It deepened her appreciation for allies like Maria and David and for the often thankless work of community organizers pushing from the outside. One evening, months later, leaving the hospital after another long day, Evelyn paused by her car. She looked at her reflection in the window. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Chief of Infectious Diseases, a respected physician in her scrubs, her ID badge displayed prominently. She touched the plastic card. It was a symbol of her hard-won achievements, a key granting access to certain spaces, a shield that had, on one occasion, protected her. But true justice, she knew, wouldn't come from individual shields. It would come when no shield was necessary. When a black woman in scrubs or jeans or a business suit could walk into any store, any neighborhood without facing automatic suspicion. When dignity wasn't conferred by a title or an ID badge, but was inherent, assumed, inviolable. Until that day, the work continued. The fight remained. Beneath the badge, beneath the title, beneath the weary exhaustion was a steady, unwavering resolve. The reckoning was not a single event, but the ongoing commitment to push, to advocate, to heal both bodies and the body politic, one patient, one policy, one difficult conversation at a time. The Houston night air was still heavy, but tonight, it felt less like oppression and more like the waiting potential before a cleansing rain.